So, I'm Anneke Vliegen, as you just heard, and I'm here talking to you from Belgium, 6 o'clock in the evening here, but I hear good afternoon is in order for all of you, unless there's people watching from elsewhere as well. In any case, welcome. I've kind of made medical gaslighting and raising a voice against it, particularly my focus as an EDS patient myself. And you'll notice the zebra on the book. I'm pretty sure all of you will be familiar with the zebra. If not, we can cover that in the question and answer session. Um, um, we agreed that I would keep the talk relatively brief, so I'm sticking with an introduction and then we can seek depth where you need to find it in the question and answer session rather than me just giving a long speech and maybe missing the point that you're seeking. So, um, just to go right back to basics, where does this term medical gaslighting come from? What is it? I'm kind of assuming you know, but I didn't know until about 2 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I'd heard the term gaslighting. It's a popular term. I saw it pass on Facebook in particular, but elsewhere as well. And it was usually linked with relationships that had gone toxic. And usually there's a reference to somebody being narcissistic, whether that's a lover or a parent or a boss, um, or other relationships where that happens in. Um, but I couldn't quite get what gaslighting had to do with the behavior that was being described until I saw an interview with Stephen Fry. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Stephen Fry, he's a British actor, and he was talking about the film called Gaslight, and it was a black and white film that came out in 1944. There were other versions that followed it because it was apparently a very good and popular film. And as I understood it, what happens in that film is that it's about a couple who live in a big house, several stories, and the house is lit by gaslight, and the gas is the construction for the gas, however you want to call it. It's up in the attic, and so what the husband does is whenever he leaves his wife alone in the living room, kitchen, whatever, he goes upstairs first, twiddles with the gas, and then goes about his business. And then he comes back, twiddles with it all again to set it right again, and goes in. And she says, "Oh, that was weird. When you were gone, the lights were flickering, and there must be something with the gas. Would you go and check?" And he goes, "Well, there's no problem. I don't see a problem. Do you?" And this, of course, happens repeatedly to the point where she starts to question her own sanity. There must be something wrong with me. But it never happens when anyone else is present, so or not when he's present anyway. And as Stephen Fry was explaining about this, I was thinking, that's what happened to me. That's exactly what happened to me. I was taught to question my own sanity, and I actually joined in because I thought, if it is my mind that is causing my body to behave as badly as it seems to, and I can learn how to manage and control that, then I could be healed. How brilliant would that be? So I wanted to join in with that. I started to really question myself. And so, anyway, I thought I just invented the term medical gaslighting. I was really proud of myself, but I thought I better check that. So I went onto the internet and typed it in. And there it was. It was a term that was already used, though I'd never come across it. And what I saw was that it's used usually as a sideline to something else, to a particular condition, to a particular history. Um, and for me, I've gone the other way around. For me, medical gaslighting has very much become my focus. And the story about the conditions, etc., the way we choose to live, have to live, the lessons I've learned, um, and so forth, they are the sidelines. The medical gaslighting, I really feel we could do with focusing on particularly with patients with EDS, but many others as well who suffer with conditions that are chronic, barely visible, fluctuating, and or rare, because we're particularly vulnerable to it. And I'll tell you why in, I think it's the next slide. But so what does it mean? Well, patient complains of having physical symptoms. In I don't need to list to you the kind of things that EDS patients can come up with long before they know they have EDS. And the things, certainly in my childhood, there was multifarious things, and they didn't seem connected. There were, if you hear something in the background, my husband is sneaking around here, so my apologies. He's about to go and do the shopping. Um, so we present with physical symptoms, and initially, if you present with a symptom, most of the time, I hope it's the same in other countries too, certainly in Belgium, you tend to be taken seriously. I certainly was. But gradually, since general advice that would normally work for other people is given, and it doesn't seem to work, gradually disbelief creeps in. And also because the symptoms are different every time, there's something else to complain about. I mean, friends at school very lovingly and very with good humor said things like, "Oh no, you've read the book again and found something you haven't had yet," you know. Um, but with doctors, with nurses, with therapists, with social workers, with the professionals in general, they start to question your integrity. They certainly did mine, to the point where I did. And the undercurrent always is that the condition is psychosomatic. It must be. The symptoms must be either faked, imagined, exaggerated. The patient really should try harder. You know, you can say, I've done everything you said, I followed it to the letter, but the results aren't there. So that can't quite be right. You may think that's what you're doing, but you should try harder, really. And the fact that I'll talk about myself because I kind of feel that patients who have been medically gaslit have been talked for too often. Um, I have learned that my experience, there's a lot of recognition for other people in my experience, but there's also differences. So um, I don't want to be me, but I do, because it kind of leaves the openness to your personal experience. So if I do fall into the trap of doing the you and the we, please understand that I'm aware. Um, because a conviction grows that it's all in the patient's mind, this conviction grows in the doctor's mind, by the way, a reluctance sets in to investigate further. And that's where one of the dangers lies. So, how does it relate to Ehlers-Danlos specifically? Well, as I said, those four elements are present. You know, I hope we can all agree it's a chronic condition that for many patients, actually, many patients refer to it as invisible. I kind of refuse to do that because, for one, those really, really close to the patient, certainly in my case, those really, really close, they know, they see it when it's there. Not always, they miss clues sometimes and so on, but it really isn't invisible to them. But neither really is it to other people who are prepared to see, as in, when it's at its worst, they might notice a difference, or when I'm injured, which is often the case with Ehlers-Danlos, that's visible when there's bandages, for example, being used, or other aids and adaptations make it visible as well. So I use the term barely visible. And I also use it because a lot of the time we're responsible ourselves for keeping it invisible, because that has a lot of advantages as well. It's a thing to weigh up how we go further with that as a community of patients. It fluctuates. It's in different places, it's in different levels of severity. Sometimes there's predictability. There's things that I shouldn't be doing that, but I'm gonna do it anyway, and I know I'm gonna be exhausted afterwards. But certainly with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, it just happens in the moment a lot of the time. It really is a condition in which you have to be ready to expect the unexpected. And rare, I say relatively rare because I've learned that the definition of rare is different in different countries and areas, and I kind of cover my tracks by saying relatively rare. Um, it's certainly rare enough for, talking about me again, for me to be the first patient with EDS my GP has ever seen, and my son and I are her only EDS patients. And thankfully, she's one that's willing to acknowledge that I'm the expert in that field when we talk. Now, the chronic aspect of it means that what I said before about you get given advice, we get, that eat healthy, exercise enough, rest enough, um, sleep hygiene rules, keep fit, drink a lot of water, eat healthily, standard things. Um, and we keep coming back. And we keep saying either there's something else wrong again, or come back with the same complaint that isn't shifting. It's maybe even getting worse by trying all these things and being so focused on trying to get better. So it's easy for the doctor to start seeing us as malingerers when we keep going back. That kind of it's an expression of the frustration at their own limitations. We've tried everything and it's not helping. And instead of then going to, so we don't know, maybe we need to look into an area that we haven't thought of yet. It's, I've covered everything I can and know, so therefore it's your fault. It's a very natural thing to do, but it's probably not the best thing to do as a professional with a patient in front of you. The fact that it's barely visible is expressed, I think, the worst part of that for me. And I hope you'll tell me later in the question and answer whether that resonates with you as well. Unless it's at A&E, I don't know if you call it that, ER, I think you call it in America, don't you? The emergency department. Unless it's because I'm going there. If I'm just going to my GP being general practitioner, family doctor, um, when I go there or I go for a consultation with a specialist, I don't dress up like I'm going to a party, but I make sure that I look reasonably well, I'm cared for, I present well, no matter what the cost afterwards or in advance, in fact. Um, so I present at what my best is at that time, which means to observe there's actually a lack of evidence. And I'm assuming most of us will have heard the, but you don't look like you're in pain. Um, so we're saying stuff and they're not seeing it. And we're also creating an optical illusion because the most natural thing for a human brain to do when they see something is to generalize it, to base it on what that brain already knows, goes right back to being safe in nature. Yeah, I've seen that. That's a danger. And if you go to those museums which do the optical illusions and it explains it with each exhibit, have you looked at that angle and seen that actually it's different? I think that's what happens with us as well. That with a patient with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, as a health professional, you really need to look from a different angle. Um, and again, the same is true when we're talking about the fluctuating side of it. It undermines our credibility when we go and, last week. Now, at the moment, I was at the emergency department this morning and I've got a cast on my foot. But I also have arthritis in my neck, for example. Now we know these things. These things have been investigated and we know. But there was a point where those things wouldn't happen. But my foot was very, very swollen. So there was something objective for them to see. But without that, And for example, with my neck, that would not have been investigated. That actually happened to me with my lower back. By the time they were prepared to investigate, it was an endocrinologist who wrote a prescription for an MRI, who said this isn't normal anymore, has nobody else done anything about it. And a neurosurgeon said to one of the second one being the most complicated operation that they do in that hospital, was needed for my back. It had been left that long that it really was neglect, but it was on the basis of, yeah, but you always come with something different anyway. I mean, we can't keep pumping money into investigations when a lot of them didn't show anything either. Post-exertional malaise. I read that it's a portion of EDS patients that have it, where you get a really exaggerated response in terms of malaise and exhaustion to whatever the activity was. And sometimes we choose, often it just happens, but sometimes we choose to go there because of the quality of life we might get from the activity. We might thrive emotionally for much longer on the activity than the post exertional malaise will make us physically ill. That too is a difficult one for someone from the outside to stomach and understand, and it's important that we explain that properly. Um, Functional hours is another way of explaining to people how those fluctuations work, how that optical illusion is an illusion. Um, Again, it was something I read on Facebook and I started applying it, and it strikes me that for me, all through my adult life, on average, I have had about 4 to 5 functional hours in a day. But I have to stress the average because I have some days that are better. Sometimes I even have weeks, and sometimes even a spell of a few months where I'm functioning that bit better. But it's inevitably followed by periods, something will happen that'll set me back. And the quality of the activities that I can do, the tasks that I can perform in those functional hours, that varies too. So not only the amount, but the amount on average comes out to be the same, but it doesn't look as if it does because it's an average. But the quality of what I can do also fluctuates, which also is difficult for someone from the outside in watching you. Now they can do that, and now they can't. What's going on here? It's a lot easier to give that a psychological explanation than really go and look for the root cause, and especially if we're talking about a relatively rare condition. There's lack of knowledge about them anyway. There's lack of research. There isn't the time, there isn't the money because it's a small group of patients. Well, it'll remain a small group of patients if you don't research it properly so that you can identify the people who it's happening to. And especially if you're saying to the people it's happening to, well, that only happens in so few cases that the chances that you've got that are very slim. My answer to that is the chances I have it is 50-50. Either I have it or I don't. And in my case, it turned out I had. But I only got the diagnosis because I'd met a fellow patient and we'd compared notes. And she had an EDS diagnosis. I already had my adrenal insufficiency diagnosis. 3 months later, we met each other in the corridor of the hospital. We'd been complete strangers to each other before we had that conversation. And we both shouted from the other side of the corridor, "Oh, it's you! I need to tell you something." And it turned out we both had both. But if I hadn't met her, I think I still wouldn't know that I had EDS because chances are slim. Even when I did raise it, it was a chances are slim answer and some disbelief. Like, here she is with another explanation. Oh, yeah. So combine the four and you're particularly vulnerable to being medically gaslit. Now, if you're warned about that, you can kind of set the situation up slightly differently, give your explanations with that in mind, and that will help. But I think as a group of patients, we also need to, and I think not just a group of EDS patients, but groups of patients with these conditions, because there's many that meet those 4 criteria. If we raised our voice a bit louder, if we did away with the shame and the guilt of that kind of abuse of power and spoke up, we might actually change something. I hope so. That's my aim. That's one of them. So, what are these effects? Well, on the patient individually, um, again, I can talk about myself. I have generalized that a bit because I've checked it, but I haven't done any proper scientific research on the matter. I'm going by what I hear from other fellow patients. Um, there's like a thought aspect, there's a feelings aspect, and there's the effect of that aspect. So, we are isolated by the condition itself, almost by definition. I think people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome easily get into a situation where they're more isolated. Maybe not on the whole for all of them, but there's an element of that that just comes with the territory. But the shame and guilt that I was talking about really increases that for a lot of patients. And that happens at those times when the need for validation and for social support is at its highest. That's when the isolation happens the most. So that's a very dangerous trap to fall into. Other feelings that are often raised, confusion, even about what what do I believe? Is what I feel mental or is it physical? And if so, does that make a difference in how I have to handle it? Anger when the proof is there finally that really there is something physically wrong and there's explanation. Apart from the relief, there's also the anger. Fear about will I not be believed again? It's just hurtful when a doctor laughs out loud and says, "You don't believe all this, do you?" Which is literally what happened to me. Um, and of course, it's easy to fall into a bitterness and eventually into a level of despair, which again, these feelings are already paired with the condition itself. And in terms of thoughts, well, the self doubt, we become self deprecating. We just add a bit of humor, we'll cope with it a bit better. But that confusion and that fear and that shame and guilt of am I being dramatic? I'm probably a weakling or I'm lazy and I don't want to acknowledge it. They're probably right that I'm an attention seeker, a doctor hopper, a pill chaser, whatever term gets flung at us. It has an effect on the healthcare we receive. It has an effect on the healthcare I receive, and I am partly responsible for that. I am very aware of that now and tread carefully with my own healthcare to avoid getting in those situations. One of the things I've mentioned before is how we explain what's happened to us. You see, with a rare condition, there isn't really the vocabulary at hand to use so that people who haven't gone through that would really understand. If I say to you as fellow patients, I'm really exhausted today because I had a trip to A&E, blah, 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 you will have a good idea that a good night's sleep and a bit of extra care tomorrow will probably not take that away from me. The great majority of people would think in those terms. So it becomes very important to find words and descriptions and ways of saying it with self respect that make people understand, oh, this is different from me and it does sound worse, and how can it be? And be quite consistent with that. Very difficult to do that when we have become distrustful of health professionals because we've been harmed by them and their abuse. Um, it sets us up for an unstable therapeutic relationship from the start because we go in almost expecting that the new person pays the debt that the others have caused. So I've tried to be aware of that and actually even it out. That kind of start to a relationship is a real hindrance to open communication. And you might have the best vocabulary in the world to explain to those closest to you who you feel safe with and happy with what's happening to you because you know you'll be heard. But when the assumption is, here we have another one, they're not going to believe me anyway, that becomes much more difficult, even if you do have that vocabulary. It becomes a block to raising what's going on. It's like I'll test the water, I'll just mention something and see how they respond to that. Maybe I can mention something more with this person, rather than actually going in and being the vulnerable patient that you have every right to be. The other really important thing and a risk to our healthcare is that we have doubts about seeking help. We do I've heard this from other patients as well. It really isn't just me. That's hurting. It's pretty bad. It's highly uncomfortable. It's something I don't know yet. To me, it's ringing alarm bells. Should I mention it to my husband, for example? Perhaps I should. Then the conversation between the two of us, because is this something that warrants calling a doctor? If we go to, yes, it is, do we wait? Let's assume it's outside of the office hours. Do we wait until we can see our own doctor? Or do we go to the duty doctor? Do we call them? Can you take it? Does it need to be seen by the emergency department? If so, can you take me to it? Or do we need to call an ambulance? Now, that whole spectrum gets covered almost every single time. I mean, I've only had an ambulance called for me once, I think. But even then, I just assumed it was strangers that called the ambulance, and I assumed that they would say, the ambulance people would say, well, that was an exaggeration, wasn't it? You just had a fall. I mean, the fact that I was bleeding everywhere and that my nose was slightly broken, there's a bit missing actually in the bone. And you can still see this effect. The other one cracked as well, but this one's dropped off again. You know, I honestly know very few generally healthy people who go through that process. And it's a risk, it's a danger, because a lot of people end up not calling for the help that they do need and that they have the right to. And I know in America there's the added thing about the finance and the insurances and stuff. I don't know that very well. We're very, very blessed and lucky here in Belgium. And it's no surprise that genuine mental health issues follow. So I'm aware of the time. I shall skip through. You've probably read the other things if you can see them. There's an effect on social care because we're too disheartened to request support. We don't believe in it anymore. We feel cheated by the system. We make assumptions about the fact that they will make assumptions about us, which they often do. We're too worn down. Overcoming our own damaged reputation takes extra effort. Overcoming the emotional baggage takes extra effort. Is it really worth it? We're too sick to do without the aid, but we're too well to qualify. And we have a history of medical notes undermining our integrity anyway, so we're vulnerable to maltreatment. And that results in society. I've skipped one, but it's a short one. We get the social gaslighting. I'm quite sure a lot of you will be familiar with I saw her dancing at the wedding last week, and look now. And she's always saying she can't do her shopping and can't do her cooking, but she could do that then, couldn't she? That's the social gaslighting. It's become culturally and politically as well acceptable to maltreat patients who fall into the category with those four. I would love to find a short term for that. And it comes down to what we see quite often on the internet. You think I pretend to be ill? Well, I constantly have to pretend I am well. So I felt called to write my own story about it because if we just talk about the issue to people so they become aware, there's nothing to connect with. Connection is very important to get people on board. So I decided to write my own story, and it seems to be working in terms of getting people on board, but it's very, very slow. But the story of the book, called Recognize Me, is one of misdiagnosis of MECFS, medical gaslighting for 20 years, nonetheless finding a happy marriage and enjoying my motherhood, and through those finding my path to happiness with a lot of physical complaints. The aim of the book is to strive for recognition for patients, not just myself, to expand that vocabulary we talked about, to raise the awareness, to open up communication in the belief that increased understanding of each other's position will lead to a more dignified approach. You can find more about the book and about me if you follow this QR code. I should have typed the links in as well. I realize that. I can always put them in the chat if anybody wants them. At the moment, I'm up for winning a literature prize at a books fair here in Belgium. So the site is in Dutch. To vote for me, I'm in third place at the moment. But just imagine if a person who's written their very first book as a chronically ill patient and therefore by definition more isolated than others, writing about a very niche subject actually wins a prize, a literature prize, how much that would amplify the voice against medical gaslighting. It would give a very clear message about how important that is. And that really is that I'm not asking you for me to win it for the prize because it's a leather document holder. It's really not the thing I want. You can have it if you want it. But please do go and vote for me, and you can do that via this QR code. And so, I wasn't going to present that one yet. That was in case we got there with the question and answer session. So, as I said, I couldn't see you whilst I had that slideshow on. I will see if I can. So, we should be back together now.
Could you put the QR code back up for a moment?
Oh, yes, I can. Of course, I can. There it is. In fact, I can leave it up and I can see you, but I suppose you can't see me whilst that's on, or can you?
What's up?
Do you want me to put the actual link in the chat?
That would be great.
Okay, I'll do that.
And I'll put it on our Facebook as well.
Excellent. I'll take you to my link tree first. Bear with me. The link's in Dutch, but the site is in both languages. So that's to my website, to my link tree. And then the Books and Bites one. It's a bit of a longer route to get to that one. I need 36 more votes to be in the number 2 place. But then there's a big difference. Then it's 200 and odd more that I need. And this, see, is the link to go and vote. Can you all see it?
Yep.
Oh, there's somebody from Michigan here. Hello. Tell me when I can stop the screen sharing and we can.
Oh, you're good.
Am I good? Okay. We should be all together now. Are there any questions or anything we can talk about together that could be of importance to you or that you find recognition in?
This is Constance. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello.
Hi, thank you very much. You're eloquently described a sad situation and a familiar situation. I'm a retired advanced practice nurse for pediatric and neonatal patients. Okay. And I early on I had a fall. I'm 69 now. I had a fall,
Okay.
and this was not at all in on the horizon. I have hypermobile EDS. Was just diagnosed, but my symptoms were so strange from the fall. I had a fractured ankle, but my neurological symptoms were very strange.
Yeah.
And I was first given weird diagnoses, and then it was a functional diagnosis. And I told them I don't even fit the profile for a person with conversion disorder, or whatever. And neither was I referred to psychiatry. However,
Oh,
yeah. However, I was wise enough, and I was at Mayo, Mayo Clinic. um, however, I was wise enough to early on to get a counselor to speak with, because I was so furious with the physicians. Never had anything that was prolonged in my life. I mean, had some medical problems, but they were very short lived. And that helped me so much. And I knew I was being gaslighted. Um, and it's, it's such a helpless feeling, because you can never, you can just can't get past things. And along with that, I ended up with myelopathy, and finally got surgery. But I'm still being gaslighted about complications from that. You know, you don't have it. I don't see anything, and it's so frustrating. And I I'm able to put things in what's urgent, what's critical. Myself being a nurse,
yes.
that helps.
Yeah.
Um, but it doesn't ease the pain that you feel, and
No.
the fact that you're going to hit up against it. It's not going to stop.
No.
That's very frustrating. But your story is beautiful. I want to get your book.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I do hope you win the prize, because um, I just can't believe that, I took care of children with EDS. um, and I know the struggles that they had, especially in the educational system. Um, they had a lot of good physicians, but the educational system would not recognize what, they just couldn't get it out of their head, and they were very much stuck on the "you look fine." um, yeah, yeah. So thank you
I've,
so much.
I've actually created a quiz
Mhm.
for the talks that I give that are longer. I mean, to
Uh-huh.
actually put a quiz into what needs to be an informational talk, you really need to have time.
Yes.
Um, but I used it when I was speaking to the School of Medicine at the University of Leeds.
Mhm.
The interesting thing was that there was an ME patient there who, had the diagnosis of
Right.
ME,
Yeah.
myalgic encephalomyelitis,
Yes.
but who was a medical student,
Uh-huh.
and a friend who very much took the role of carer as well
Mhm.
to a degree, and there was staff there, um, and one of the first what I've done is I've typed in the kind of things that we hear, like you're too young to be that sick,
Yes.
for example. I typed that into AI and then
Mhm.
chose a picture, and I showed them the pictures, and they have to guess
Uh-huh.
what
Ah.
the statement is. Yeah, and it's actually great advocacy for some
Mhm.
people. That quiz works a lot better than a whole explanation and
Mhm.
analysis of
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
happening, because it really rings true. Suddenly they're like,
Right.
"I've heard myself say that.
Uh-huh.
I
Uh-huh.
really
Yeah.
shouldn't have."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the interesting thing was that it was that friend who was a medical student
Mhm.
and took great care of her friend, who had an ME diagnosis. I always put it
Mhm.
that way because,
Mhm.
you know,
Right.
after what happened to me as well, I'm like, well, you have the diagnosis. I
Yeah.
respect that. And in fact, with HEDS, it's much the same, isn't it? Because there's a lot of doctors like, well, that doesn't exist because we
Mhm.
can't prove it in your blood.
Mhm.
But it was that friend who got almost all of the questions right.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah.
Yeah. It was very
Yeah.
heartwarming to see, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, demonstrates the empathy that's there, that
Yeah.
improves the perception.
Yes.
Um, yes. So that's neat. Yeah.
But
Well,
thank you for sharing yours,
thank you.
because I have a background in the health service as well. I was an occupational therapist, and I did
Okay.
grad in
Yeah.
health research.
Yeah.
So the way I look at it is kind of skewed by that. You know, I have the
Yes.
patient experience, but I also can take a step back and look at it a bit more theoretically,
Yeah.
which has advantages and disadvantages,
Right.
which
Exactly.
I'm sure you'll know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, mm, it's hard to get the care that you know that you need, you know, and that you're so aware of it. So that's hitting you all the time. Whereas, you know, someone who's not in healthcare wouldn't have those thoughts. You know, so that made it additionally hard. Um, but I'm just gonna, you know, as you said, eat well, exercise.
The doctor today, but he knew, he was one of the doctors who's on the ball.
Yeah.
When I said, he said, "We can't see a fracture on the X-rays." And I
Yes.
said, "Well, I'm not surprised because I've got EDS." Now, having said that, my son is one of those EDS patients who fractures more easily, but I don't. I'm rubber, you know, I'm one of those rubber patients. And he said, "EDS as well?" I said, "Yeah, there's a long list there of all sorts of diagnoses I've got." "Yeah, I noticed that. Is EDS among them? Let's have a look." You know, "Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's there." And he was immediately on board with great humor as well. He
Mm.
understood that it's possible to be in extreme pain and still want to have fun because it helps me cope
Mm.
with the pain. And
Yes.
he joined in. And so after he'd done the bit about, you know, we need to put a cast on and this is what will happen, he went, "And next time you'll have to be a bit more careful, won't you?"
Of
It's like,
course,
yeah,
of course.
that's really gonna help.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
had such fun with that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Cute. Yeah.
Yeah, and it didn't feel like gaslighting. When it's done in the right way, it's not gaslighting. I don't
Right. Right.
preach
Yes.
that everybody has to stop saying anything like that, but say it in the right tone and with respect and with he double checked as well. He said, "You do realize I was joking?" "Yeah, I
Yes.
did. We're fine."
Very good. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's um on Instagram accounts that I'm on. I see. Well, I think they're from. They usually emanate from the EDS website. The net. I guess it's international. Um,
Yeah.
and but a lot of medical students are showing up. They have EDS, or you know that's why they've gone into this area, and not just medical students, nurses, occupational therapists, physical therapists. So they're speaking out. I have it. I'm in school. I'm coping. And moving forward to learn about and want to have, you know, this is my population for care. So, you know, that's
Can I
good.
just I don't wanna be too pushy about that
No,
because that's not what tonight is about. But if you are in touch with anybody like that, or if you do have your Instagram page and you're willing to, please, please call for votes from others as well because I can't do it on my own.
I will. I'll post it myself on both
I've got a
Facebook.
visual if you want. I
Yeah.
don't know if I can add visuals to the chat. I tried that. It's my first attempt at this, so bear with me. But it'll need a bit more explanation because you know what visuals are like. Does that work? Yes, it works. There you
Oh,
go.
there you go.
Are there many people present in the library as well?
We've got 4 of us here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions coming from there or comments or thoughts?
166 from
Hello.
166 people.
Yeah, I've got 166 people on TikTok.
Oh, wow. Thank you for
I
being
read
there. Thank you for still being there because I do keep
Yes.
going on.
I read half the book. I'm halfway through it. I started it Wednesday, and not only am I in a library with people like me meeting an author on my own TikTok channel, I'm like, this is like my childhood dream.
Oh, you're gonna make me cry now.
I'm at the part where your
I'm
son
sure
is
I
going
don't need to
school and
explain the
has
bit
to
about how
be-
emotional you get on the days when the pain is so severe and unexpected and acute. Just thank you so much.
I needed your book this week. Last week I was depressed and I was just diagnosed with like 30 plus conditions last year. And I was like, your son's going to school and coming to help clean your house right now. And you said, like you made a choice and that part in the book when you took a drink and I've done the same, like you make a choice. I'm either gonna, I'm so happy to meet you. I love your book. I can't wait to go finish it. It got a
Thank
little
you,
emotional.
thank you, thank you. Do post reactions. On my website, there's a page for review, even if it's short, however short or long you choose. Wherever you bought it from, please, please. I think, was it your review I saw?
Not yet. I've done, I'll do
Because
a
somebody
TikTok.
wrote something very, very similar to what you've just
I
said,
got it
just
on
recently.
Amazon.
Hmm?
Yes,
Pardon?
I got mine on Kindle.
Yeah, mine's on my Kindle right now. So I'll have it always. So because I used to collect books and I obviously can't cart all the books I want to bring around.
I'll have to get your book. I'm excited to do that. My name is Anita.
Yeah, hi, Anita.
Oh, this has been wonderful. Thank you. As you were speaking, I was really touched to think about the social gaslighting, because I thought about how infrequently I post on social media because I don't want people to think that I might have fun.
Yeah.
Because if I have fun, well, then they might think that I'm not sick. And, how could a sick person have fun? Well, people at my work donate their time to me. And so I'm afraid that if they see me out having even just fun one time, they're gonna think that, but I donated my leave to her. And so I'm afraid to have fun ever. Sorry, Anneke, we can't hear you.
I switched it off because I was losing you as you were talking. So I
Yeah.
thought maybe that'll help because it'll save some bandwidth, and it did. Um, but know that you're not alone, which doesn't make the situation any better. But there are people out here, lots of people out here, who do understand, who do know, who have been there. But the thing is, exactly like you're saying, we're not sharing those stories because of the shame and the guilt that comes with it. Let's lift ourselves out of that. So, right at the end of the book, life was often ridiculous. The capacity to celebrate that simple fact eclipsed many challenges. It gave the word pity party their true meaning. Our particular dark humour brightened our existence. Although I was more limited and had to be careful, I figured out there was still enough movement left in me. We swapped household chores accordingly. It helped me nurture a sense of tranquility and accomplishment. I had expected the opposite. I could so easily have slid into doom and gloom, rendering me mentally paralyzed and terror stricken. Instead, I got on with what I could and found pleasure in connecting, in the love between us, in seeing delight in each other's faces. In hospital, a cleaning lady dropped into the conversation. We always have to consider there are other people going through worse. That sounded like I should base my inner peace on the suffering of others. My heart went out to people who have difficulty finding pleasure. Often enough, they got blamed for being morose. They had to cope with that, on top of feeling miserable already. People were hastily put into categories. Our society identified people as either weak or strong. Woe betide the former, because being feeble is all there is to them. Whether it was through lack of education, health, or wealth, was all the same. They should be seen as devoid of any positive prospects. They should be defined by their deficiency. The mighty should protect the frail. Yet, We were all weaklings, who were all strong in some ways. My body was falling apart, but I did have the imagination, grit, and enthusiasm to live with that. For others, it may be the opposite. We are all mixed and matched. I believed if people were well integrated, they would be naturally protected. We could all complement each other. The community would carry shared responsibility. It would solve many problems. In a conversation with a close friend, my skills and worth came up. He was very clear I had something to offer the world that deserved financial reward. He laughed. You should be a comedian. I was daft enough to look into it. This soon appeared too strenuous. Everything I had considered to establish some financial independence had. It was a painful issue for me. I had investigated a multitude of ideas over the years. Each time I faced the limits of my capabilities and of my usable hours. This conversation started me on that route again. The way I approached it this time was testament to the breakthroughs I had made. I credited my talents and the things I was passionate about. It was still a lot easier to see obstacles than come up with potential solutions. Slowly, various thoughts started to blend. Physically and emotionally, I had made strides forward. The techniques for maintaining optimal physical and mental health had etched themselves into my daily routine. They saw me through the ups and downs that naturally come with conditions like mine. Multifarious medical specialists and therapists facilitated my progress. A multidisciplinary team was starting to work together. The complexities of our family's health issues were recognized. We were represented and upheld with dignity and clarity. I was able to state my needs and wants, my fears and my expectations. This was mostly received openly and respectfully. What struck me was the ease with which this happened. It took little conscious effort. Looking back on the abuse I had suffered, I found something had changed. I felt liberated from a burden I'd been carrying for too long. Blogging and social media had helped. My confidence had grown enough to accept the compliments I received about my content. Having been asked by a couple of people to give feedback on their writings as a favour, the idea of a book came to the surface. I'd often talked about it. A couple of times I'd written a few pages. This was possible. After a successful neck operation, I returned to the rehabilitation hospital that had turned my life around. In between treatments, I started planning. I could set aside 1 hour every weekday. I would allow myself a break at weekends. It might be slow, but it should get done. I had a positive story to tell. It might help others to find out about medical gaslighting. Fellow patients may find recognition as well as coping strategies. People studying or working in caring professions may be interested to learn more. My account may have an impact on how invisible, rare, and/or chronic diseases are approached. My words may spread some of my glitter. Finding a viable solution eased a very old pain, and that, for this memoir, marked the beginning.